if I can answer them, I'll answer them. I go by Craig. Yeah, what's your name? If you want to, that's fine.
To educate and
Hang on. Oh my God. Okay.
Is this on my mic? Oh, yeah. Okay. Am I talking too loud?
No, but hang on a second. I'm going to flip here. Anytime you want to go.
Okay. Hello, thank you for joining us on MIRS TV, where we strive to educate, inform, and question issues regarding foreclosures, banking, and the economy. My name is Janet Reiner, and today is Thursday, March 28, 2013, and today's guest is Dr. Paul Craig Roberts. Dr. Paul Craig Roberts is an American economist and a columnist for the Creators Syndicate. He served as an assistant secretary to the Treasury in the Reagan administration and ensuring fame as a co-founder of Reaganomics, and he is a former editor and columnist for the Wall Street Journal, Business Week, and Scripps Howard News Service, who has testified before congressional committees on 30 occasions on issues of economic policy. Dr. Roberts has written extensively that during the 21st century, the Bush and Obama administrations have destroyed the U.S. constitutional predictions of American civil liberties, such as habeas corpus and due process in the name of war on terrorism. His latest book, The Failure of Laissez-Faire Capitalism, will soon be and should be on everyone's must-read list. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Roberts. We're so excited about having you on the show.
Thanks, Janet.
How are you?
I'm doing well.
How's the weather down there?
Oh, it's a beautiful day.
Should be outside on the beach, right?
Yes.
Wonderful. Let me ask you a couple questions. I'm so excited about having you, and I would like to ask you right up front, what made you decide to write this book? You are a prolific writer, and I love the stuff that you write on, and it touches the core of every homeowner and every person in America. What made you decide to write this particular book?
I wrote this book because the policymakers haven't a clue as to what's going on. They think the problem is limited to the banks, and that if they print enough money, they can make the banks solve it. But of course, the real problem with the American economy is that so many middle-class jobs have been moved offshore to China, to India mainly, but to a variety of places, because the corporations found out that if they could cut their labor costs, the profits went way up. And so the shareholders were happy, and the executives paid themselves multi-million-dollar bonuses. So millions of manufacturing jobs and also professional service jobs like software engineering, research, design. These jobs have been moved out of America. And when you move jobs out, you move the consumer income associated with those jobs,
Right.
the gross domestic product associated with those jobs, the tax base associated with those jobs, and when the products are made abroad and they come back into the United States, they come in as imports, and so the trade balance gets worse. So what has happened, the corporations, in order to maximize profits, have destroyed the ladders of upward mobility. They have really damaged the middle class, reduced its ranks, run up the trade deficit, and run up the budget deficit by moving all the consumer income and gross domestic product offshore. So this is the major problem. This is bigger than the financial crisis, which is still ongoing.
Well, I think the financial crisis is just one small cog of a bigger problem. Is that correct?
It's a big problem, part of a huge problem.
Right.
And the financial crisis is the product of deregulation. And of course, that's what the title of my book means. Laissez-faire means no regulation of the economy. And the United States economy over the last 25 years was progressively deregulated, particularly in the financial sector. They simply removed all the regulation.
So,
And you may remember the Federal Reserve Chairman, Alan Greenspan, Secretary of the Treasury, the Chairman of the SEC, they all told Congress markets are self-regulating. We're not going to regulate them. Don't regulate them. It's much better. Well, anyone with a bit of sense knew that that was wrong, and that it would lead in all kinds of fraud, excessive debt leverage, exposure of bank capital far beyond the risk that they could afford, and a crisis. And lo and behold, that's what it did.
exactly. Do you think we should expect to see another bust soon as a result of the government's continued deregulation of the securitization markets?
Bennett, would you repeat that question?
Do you think that we should expect to see another bust as a result of the government's continued deregulation of the securitization markets?
We have three big bubbles right now.
Three.
We have a bond market bubble due to the fact that the Federal Reserve has interest rates so low that below the rate of inflation. So we have negative real interest rates, which means extremely high bond prices. The bond prices are so high that if you buy one, you really don't get any interest income from them. So that's a bubble. The bond market's a bubble. And all the money that the Federal Reserve is pouring into the banks is not being relent into the economy by the banks. The people are too indebted to borrow, the banks are too busted to lend, so the banks are using the money for stock market speculation. They will bet on stock prices. There are all sorts of stock future derivatives. And so that has produced a bubble in the stock market. There's no reason for the stock market to be where it is. Retail sales are very low, and the profits that the corporations are making are due to laying off workers, not to selling more goods and services. So the stock market's a bubble, and then we have the dollar. The dollar is a bubble. It's the biggest bubble. The dollar is the world reserve currency. However, it's being created in excess of $1 trillion new dollars per year. The Federal Reserve is currently printing, creating 85 billion new dollars every month. That totals to more than $1 trillion a year. But the demand for dollars is not growing by $1 trillion. In fact, most central banks are trying to unload their dollars, to lighten the dollar component of their reserves. We know the central banks now are buying gold. And so the dollar is very vulnerable. Its exchange rate is unrealistically high, given the fact the Fed is creating dollars while the demand for dollars is falling. So that is the third bubble. And it's likely to be the one that pops first. And when it does, the other two bubbles will automatically pop as well. And it will be one heck of a crisis.
Wow. Wow. Do you feel that the worsening economy will further open up the shadow or underground economy in equal contrast to what is happening in the mainstream economy?
It's very difficult to operate in an economy without money. And
I'm sorry?
so everyone, whether they're in an underground economy or whatever, if the dollar loses exchange value, it will affect everyone. You see, the United States now is very import dependent. It's not just energy that we import. We import our clothes, our shoes, our manufactured products, high technology products. If you go to Walmart and look at all the American brands, brand names are American, but if you look at where they're made in China or Indonesia or somewhere else. And so if the dollar's exchange rate falls, the prices go up. So people who are accustomed to shopping in Walmart, if the dollar falls, one day they'll walk into Walmart and they'll think they walked into Neiman Marcus.
Wow. Wow. Amazing. I know that when you did research with your book, was any of your research pointing to the fact that certain sectors of our government are taking marching orders from the British banking system, such as LIBOR?
You broke up,
Oh,
Janet.
I'm sorry.
You'll have to edit this out, but I didn't hear that. Try again.
Okay, let me repeat it. Okay, so I said when you did research for your book, did any aspect of your research point to the fact that certain sectors of our government are taking marching orders from the British banking system, such as LIBOR?
No, I don't think we need to rely on that type of an explanation. What happened? The policymakers confused offshoring of jobs with free trade.
Okay.
They think it's free trade. And in economic theory, free trade is good. It's good for both parties. And so as long as offshoring was marketed as free trade, the policymakers weren't worried about it. And so it's gone on for so long that it undermined the ability of consumer incomes in the United States to grow. And so the consumer economy was coming to a halt. And so what the Federal Reserve did to make up for the missing growth in consumer income, the Federal Reserve, Alan Greenspan, started a credit boom. He drove interest rates down. He set off the housing boom. And they relied on debt, the buildup of consumer debt, to substitute for the missing growth in consumer income. So what the consumer was spending was not increases in their income, but increases in their debt. For example, the housing boom drove up house prices. People refinanced their mortgages, took out the equity, spent it. They ran up massive credit card debt. So the economy, instead of being driven by increased productivity, resulting in higher wages and higher consumer demand, was driven by a build-up in consumer debt. Well, of course, there's a limit to that. As soon as the debt level reaches the point that you can't service it or you can't service anymore, there's no possibility of keeping the economy going. So that limit occurred, and of course they had all the real estate derivatives dramatically over leveraged, and so it all busted and fell apart.
Right.
So that is basically how this came about. They confused free trade with jobs offshoring, and as an expedient, they tried to expand debt to make up for the lack of growth in real income. And
Well,
that's how we got the crisis.
you know, and you brought up a really good issue here regarding regarding the foreclosures and the consumer debt. One of the challenges that homeowners are having is not only the consumer debt, but the whole securitization regarding mortgages. And one of the issues that has been a very hot topic across the United States is whether or not institutions such as the mortgage electronic registration system, whether or not they're a valid beneficiary, and whether or not the recordation system should be changed. I know it's a small cog in the economic system, but what are your do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think what the authorities did, instead of trying to save the homeowners and homeownership the way they did in the Great Depression in the 30s, instead they focused on saving the over-leveraged banks.
Okay.
And so what it showed was that the government of the United States was not responsive to the needs of its citizens, but it was responsive to a handful of banks who had taken inordinate risk. And it decided to save the banks and to do very little for the actual homeowners who were distressed by the very process that the Fed itself had started. So I think that this shows that increasingly so-called democratic governments aren't really responsive to people. They're responsive to a few powerful interest groups. And increasingly, these powerful interest groups run the country, determine the policy, and it's always their interest over the interest of ordinary citizens.
Do you find that those the bailout on the banks, you know, there's a lot of people who go both ways, whether they should or should not have been bailed out, and there's been a tremendous pouring into these banks during the bailout. What are your opinion about that bailout, those bailouts, because they've been bailed out multiple times?
Well, they're still being bailed out. I mean, that's what the that's what quantitative easing is about, the low interest rates. The banks are still being bailed out. The reason the Fed buys the bonds is to drive up the bond prices, because the banks, their balance sheet is loaded up with debt-related derivatives. So the lower the interest rates, the higher the bond prices, the more solvent the banks look. And that's the reason for the Fed's policy. They don't have low interest rates because they're trying to help the economy. They're trying to make the banks solvent. So what should have happened is banks should have gone bust. The federal deposit insurance, the Fed can print all the money it wants, and it could have printed the money to pay off the depositors, and then the banks should have been reorganized, in fact, broken up. What in the world do you want to have a financial institution that's too big to fail? That means capitalism can't work. You know, capitalism, one of its virtues is that it eliminates inefficient enterprises, ones that make losses, mistakes. But if they're too big to be eliminated, they become permanent leeches on the public purse.
Right.
So instead of letting capitalism work and having the banks fail and be reorganized, in fact broken up so they could be managed, they decided to bail them out. But they can't stop bailing out because there's no end to the bailout. If you look at the derivative exposures of these banks, they're massive. For example, J.P. Morgan alone has derivative exposure equal to world gross domestic product.
Wow.
$70 trillion. Well, the bank hasn't any capital that could cover this exposure. Four of the big banks have a total derivative exposure of like $230 trillion. This is a multiple.
That's quadrillions. Yeah.
A multiple of world gross domestic product. So this is an absurdity, and the bailout can't stop. So what is going to happen is bubbles are going to bust. And that is what will bring it all down. Then, of course, it will have to be reorganized in some way. So by avoiding the problem, and how many years has this bailout been going on now? I mean, the banking crisis, let's see, the crisis hit when? December of 2007?
It's going on for a number of years, at least 3 or 4 that I know of.
We're now in 2013?
Right.
I mean, 6 years almost.
Wow.
By the end of the year, we're 5 years of crisis, money.
Wow.
The government can't finance its own operating budget, and so it has to borrow more than $1 trillion a year, and no one wants to lend it, so the Fed prints that.
Wow.
How did we get into this fix? Because the policy was aimed only at serving a few. And
wow.
It's not like the response of government during the 1930s. I mean, what if Roosevelt said, okay, we're only going to save J.P. Morgan and a few banks?
Well,
we'd still be in the Depression.
Oh my gosh, this is a very frightening picture that's going on that a vast majority of people are not even aware of. So what do you think is going to, what do you think that a full-scale audit of the Federal Reserve Bank will, do you think it'll potentially expose the U.S. government's plan? I mean, because right now, if we continue on the same track, it's going to basically kill capitalism, don't you think?
An audit was released of the Federal Reserve and showed that they had lent to banks, both the United States and Europe. They had lent a total of $16 trillion. That's equal to the United States national debt. It's larger than the United States gross domestic product. So the Fed just created out of thin air more money than the gross domestic product of the United States and lent it to banks. It lent 2 or 3 trillion of that 16 to English and European banks, and the rest to American banks. This is an enormous bailout. It's a huge. Can you imagine your banks needing a bailout equal to the gross domestic product of the entire country?
Well, and that begs the question is, when the government gives these banks money, when the Federal Reserve gives them money, what do you think is the underlying plan for America? I mean, obviously, when this much money is concentrated in such a small few number of people, what do you think is the underlying plan?
Well, I don't think they've got a plan, and it's catching up with them. They've created a perfect storm.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that there's a trend away from the laissez-faire capitalism in favor of total socialist or Marxism control?
See, laissez-faire always ends up in crony capitalism. Because what laissez-faire means is you remove the regulations that made the markets stable.
Right.
And that made people have economic security. Mm-hmm. When you take away regulation, markets become unstable, economic security disappears for the vast majority of the people. In other words, what deregulating markets does is it removes them from social control. It unleashes them, and they're very effective. And the result is always monopoly, concentration. We have massive financial concentration now. Also, massive concentration of the media, massive agricultural concentration. Wherever you look, the economy is more and more concentrated. It's not a free market economy. It's a monopolized economy, and that's always the result of deregulation. The purpose of deregulation is to make markets livable and functionable. So when you remove it, what happens is you get crony capitalism. A few powerful interests take over. So obviously right now we don't have laissez-faire. We had it for a period during the deregulation, and the result is not libertarian nirvana. It's crony capitalism, and that's how you get crony capitalism.
Wow. I just have two more questions for you in the few minutes that we have left. And do you believe that the design of the current economic controls in America will lead to social unrest and perhaps another civil war?
I missed that, Janet. Can you try that again?
I'm sorry. Do you believe that the design of the current economic controls in place in America will lead to social unrest and perhaps another civil war?
Oh, I think that there's going to be a lot of social and political instability and unrest.
Really?
You know, they tell you, they give you an unemployment rate. I think they've got it now down below 8%. They don't tell you that does not include any discouraged workers. And that you include the discouraged workers. So the discouraged worker is somebody who hasn't been able to find a job and just gives up looking. And so when you give up looking, the government says, oh, you're no longer in the labor force, so we are moving you out of the pool of people who we are counting to see who's unemployed. So the discouraged workers simply no longer exist as far as the statistics go. Except the government has a second measure of unemployment, which does include what they call short-term discouraged workers, people who have been discouraged for less than 1 year. Now, that official rate is double the unemployment rate that they report. So instead of being 8, it's 15 or 16%. And then if you count the long-term discouraged, the current rate of unemployment in the United States is somewhere around 22 to 23%. That's a huge number of people to be unemployed.
It is.
Then, if you have all of this money in debt creation, and it results in the top dollar bubble, you're going to have high inflation. So what do you do if you have high inflation and massive unemployment? These people survive. And the government's deficit gets larger and larger. And so there'll be more pressure to cut the income support programs. Do you see what I'm saying? So the possibility for turmoil is vast. And
wow.
A lot of people say, oh, that's why Homeland Security has purchased 2 billion bullets, and why they've purchased 2,700 tanks. And that's why they built these detainment camps everywhere. You hear all of that increasingly, and people are saying, some people are concluding that they're doing this because the government has caught on that they're creating massive social instability and they've got to have some way to contain it. Now, I don't know if that's the case or not, but it is sort of a logical deduction that you could make from having high unemployment and rising prices. That is an unstable situation. You know, during the Depression, there was high unemployment, but we didn't have simultaneously inflation.
Wow. Well,
And
Dr.
there were a lot of the unemployed could go back home to the farm.
Wow, Dr. Roberts, you are probably one of the most brilliant minds there is in the United States, and I appreciate you being on the show. And just real quickly, for 10 seconds, if you can, what advice would you give the American listening to this program how to deal with your projected theories? I mean, just real quickly, what do you think in 1 or 2 sentences?
You know, they need to have some way of making payment if the currency collapses. They need to have some food supply if the grocery stores become unreliable. And they need to be aware that this isn't the America they're used to. It could disappear on them. You know, it's not for certain it will, but it's a very high probability. So they could just wake up one day and the country they're used to just isn't there anymore.
Right. Well, Dr. Roberts, thank you so much for your time, and I really appreciate it. And like I said, you're one of the most brilliant minds there is in the economy, and thank you so much for being on our show. And for everyone listening, I hope you enjoyed our conversation today. I hope it's been informative, educational, and inspirational for your life. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye. Oh, my God.
Yeah. They should have wired you up so that I could hear you better.
Can you hear me now? Can you see me?
I can see you, but I can hear you better.
Oh, okay. You know what, Dr. Roberts, this information that you've given us is really sort of, can you see me now? Oops.
That's okay. I'll get it.
Okay. You know, thank you so much for bringing this to light. You know, one of the challenges that we've been having is that the mainstream media chooses not to release this information and chooses to keep the American population sort of dumbed down, don't you think?
It's a propaganda machine, yes.
Right.
Right.
But, you know, in many ways, it's not clear that policymakers are aware, or financial markets.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
You can't tell you can't tell spin from hype from gullibility.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Dr. Roberts, this is Will Wilson, and I was going to ask you if it would be possible, would you mind Don Darrington, who's one of the most...
Hang on a second.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Well, hang on first. Before that, you mentioned about the tanks and all the bullets and things. By what authority does the DHS have to do all this? And who are they here to protect? Are they here to protect the homeland? Is that to protect the homeland people or protect the government from the people?
they haven't given any explanation. And what's surprising is very little questioning of it. I mean, you would think that Congress would be an uproar about this.
Yeah, you think anybody that has any respect would say this is treason to against the people whom they're sworn to protect, right?
Dr. Roberts, this is Will Wilson. I want to mention, thank you again. If it's possible, would you be interested in carrying on a interview with Don Darrington on the future of cannabis economics?
Which economics?
Cannabis, like medical cannabis, organic medical cannabis. I'm right now putting together the structure for what's going to be called the Organic Medical Cannabis Patient Care System, which is going to catch on.
I just don't know anything about it. I don't think that I'm totally opposed to the war on drugs and should leave marijuana alone, especially the medical uses of it.
Yeah.
But I'm not up on that subject enough to know. I mean, I think the war on drugs is really a way to keep a huge percentage of the population locked up so the unemployment rate is even worse. And they've got, what, a huge percentage of black males in prison, right?
Oh, you bet. Yep.
And if they were out and there's no jobs, what would the unemployment rate be?
If it's possible,
So
though.
I think in a way they use the criminal code to hold down the unemployment rate, and it's a racket. You know, it's like the privatized prisons. I mean, when you privatize a prison, then wow, the demand inmates, they got to be full. They've got to be making money.
I absolutely agree with you.
Oh, yes.
There's a real problem with privatizing these jails. You know, and once again, it's a concentration of a lot of money and a lot of power in a small number of hands.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Listen, I'd be glad to come on again sometime, but I think we should just hold it to the economy and economic policy, because I'm one of the few voices myself, Michael Hudson, Nomi Prinz, who actually addressed the real situation rather than the make-believe situation.
Right.
And we'll see what happens. So, you know, we've had this new development now in Cyprus where they have decided that if you're a depositor in the bank, that you're really an investor and your capital is at risk. Your deposit is risk capital, and they can confiscate it and take it and save the bank. Well, that's a precedent. That now will spread all over the Western world. If the banks have more trouble, that'll be President Hill. They'll tell the depositors, okay, we're taking your money and saving the banks with your deposits.
Yeah.
So all of these kinds of things can spread very rapidly. You just can't. Once you have a precedent like they've now established in Cyprus, you don't know what's going to happen next.
Right.
So just see what happens and goes along, and I can come back on again just about the economy and what's happening in policy and how much worse it looks. It's not going to get any better.
Well, I would love to have you on another show. Would you be open to having another conversation?
Yes, but not right now.
No. I'm talking about in a month or two. Would you be open for maybe 2 months?
Look, I do a lot of interviews because I want to respond to people who are trying to make people aware. So you just watch events and see what's going on and call me.
Okay.
Great.
That sounds
Now,
wonderful.
Or use, don't call, use the email, because I'm about to transition out of the beach to go to the mountains.
Oh, wow.
Go
Okay.
to the where?
The mountains.
Oh, the mountains.
Head to the hills, huh?
I don't stay here during hurricane season.
Oh, yeah. By the way, would you advise me to take my money out of the bank today?
You know, it's probably not a bad idea, but you have to figure out where to put it.
I got a big mattress.
Yeah. You know, everybody
Actually, I could put
has
it.
this problem. Everybody faces the problem. What can they do? It's not clear that, I mean, in a way, they help us.
Actually, I could put my savings in an envelope.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
if-
you know, once again, I appreciate this, and hopefully in about 6 months or so, or even a year, if we could have you back, that would be wonderful. And I appreciate your time.
Oh, sure do. We're really.
You
honored
don't have to
you
wait
here.
that long.
I'm sorry?
You don't have to wait 6 months.
Okay.
Okay.
By the way, she's been on Call for Investigation and All Day Live up here. Both are weekly programs.
And Truth for the News.
And you can watch them on archive.org, or you can go to seattlecommunitymedia.com
Thank you.
and
Right.
watch them. And she'll send you the links.
Okay, perfect.
Thank
Well,
you so much.
thank you so much for your time, and it's been
Wonderful.
an honor and a pleasure.
It's
Yeah.
pleased to meet you all.
And
Thank you.
have you ever seen Arthur Laffer ever again?
Goodbye to you. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye now. Okay.
Perfect. Oh, my God.
Oh my God, what?
I was just really impressed by what he said. Can you imagine some of this? I mean, he said some pretty phenomenal things.